Well, you're watching The Drum, and with me on the panel are infectious diseases specialist Dr. Kudzai Kanhutu, host of Saturday Extra on ABCRN, Geraldine Doog, on the south coast of New South Wales, director of the Climate and Energy Program at the Australia Institute, Richie Merzier, and in Canberra, head of policy at the ACT Council of Social Services, Craig Wallace. Well, the latest COVID variant Omicron may yet upend our Christmas plans. Many of you will also be grappling with the difficult decision of whether to invite or uninvite unvaccinated family members and friends to Christmas lunch. We've heard the risks about catching COVID if you haven't had a jab, but what threat do they pose to the vaccinated? Reporter Stephanie Bolty spoke to two epidemiologists about what the latest science tells.
We're in the process of making the guest list, but can the unvaccinated come along?
I would say to them, look, you know, we've been friends for 20 years, okay, but unless you get vaccinated, I'm not going to have you in my home.
It's still too early to know what impact the new variant Omicron will have, and whether the neutralising antibodies from vaccines will do their job.
It may turn out to not be any more infectious than Delta, but in the meantime, we need to be highly precautious.
And when it comes to the dominant strain spreading in the community right now, Delta, the vaccines are proving effective.
But the vaccine efficacy for Pfizer is around 79% against Delta. So they do have a risk of acquiring infection from an unvaccinated infected person.
We know from multiple studies that household settings are the most high risk. A UK study published in The Lancet shows that vaxxed and unvaxxed may have the same peak viral loads, but how long they're infectious for differs.
Well, the vaccinated, when they are infected, seem to have a shorter period of time when they can spread it. Their vaccine works very hard to accelerate the clearance. So vaccinated people are less likely to spread infection than the unvaccinated.
Based on US data, the unvaccinated are 5 times more likely to be infected. And there's also analysis from Melbourne University that an unvaccinated friend is about 20 times more likely to give you the disease. Of course, the question needs to be asked, who is going to be at your event?
And especially people who are elderly, my age or older, or who have an impaired immune system, would by now, 4 or 5 months after their second dose, have almost no immunity whatsoever. So that's why people of my age, until we get our booster shots, would be very wary of having someone who wasn't vaccinated into our houses.
And WHO advisor and epidemiologist Mary Louise McLaws says it takes just one positive person, as this current Delta outbreak shows.
So if you're going to go to somebody's place, you're unvaccinated, then at least get a test. At least get a rapid antigen test and test yourself 2 days in a row at least.
Yeah, Kudzai, just going through some of the numbers there, you know, my eyes picked up when I heard that, you know, you're 20 times more likely to get it from an unvaccinated person. So that is because you're not likely to get it from a vaccinated person. Is that?
Yeah, precisely so. So when you've been vaccinated, when you actually do, if you happen to get COVID, you're going to shed less virus, so you're less likely to pass it on, and also your period of illness is going to be a lot shorter. So the time and the exposure that you actually have to pass it on to someone else is going to be vastly reduced. Whereas somebody who's unvaccinated, high viral burden, so shedding a lot of virus and for a lot longer period of time. And we can see now with the newer variants who have a very sort of short period of time of incubation, you're already very infectious very quickly, as opposed to the earlier variants where it was a sort of a slow uptake and then you become infectious and you have a bit of time to sort of realise that, oh, hang on, I'm sick, I probably should go and get tested or isolate. So yeah, vaccination is doing its job in terms of making people less infectious, and also meaning that when they do get sick, they're a lot less sick and they recover a lot faster.
So Richie, that does raise the stakes for the Christmas party, doesn't it? If there is one person unvaccinated and they're invited, then if you're 20 times more likely to get COVID off someone who's unvaccinated, that raises the question, what do we do? Who do we invite? What personal approach to this would you take?
Yeah, it's a tough one because you start from a perspective where you want all the people who you love at your Christmas parties. Not often you get to see them, especially when we've all been locked down. But I think the real question is whether they have COVID or not. And when I was in Glasgow for the climate conference, we had to do a rapid antigen test every day. They were easily available. They were given out for free by the UK government.
Be having rapid antigen tests before our Christmas lunch.
Well, that's right. Like, I still have some leftover ones in my suitcase. There's no reason why we couldn't be doing this here.
Geraldine, Christmas gets so much harder.
Yeah, look, I don't think anybody I know isn't vaccinated. Right. I don't think
so. Would you ask?
Well, look, I'm pathetic about it. I'm not good at this. I've watched people, whether they do, and I watch the people who are sort of who've got the legitimate right to ask, and I think, no, would I do that? Which, I don't. I'm not proud of myself. I did read a good hint that maybe if somebody was really ambivalent about having a vaccination, that you actually say, well, look, why don't I meet you on Boxing Day? Why don't I meet you in that week after?
In a more contained environment.
Yes, in other words, you do say, look, I really don't think that the rest of the family or whatever is going to be comfortable, but I do want to see you.
Ostracising someone.
Well, I mean, in other words, it's saying to them, I do want to see you, but there will be a price to your decision. So that's, to me, I sort of thought that was a bet each way. You don't think so? Look at your face.
Well, I don't know. I mean, Craig, it's a hard conversation to have, isn't it? It's a hard conversation to have, and you're saying to a family member, you're not welcome. Effectively, at the end of the day, however you want to put it.
Yeah, you are. And look, I actually think I'm very pro-vaccine. I've had my 2 jabs, but I think that it's kind of shunning people and stigmatising them and banning them is feeding this paranoia and this pushback from the unvaccinated. So, I mean, it's actually the anti-vaxxers and people who aren't vaccinated who are getting really, really sick from this. So I'd probably invite them, but I'd say, look, I'm worried about you. I care about you. I want you to be around next Christmas, and I'd probably dangle a few syringes off the Christmas tree and give them a few hints.
You lot, you've got someone over here saying, I want you to be tested. You're going to dangle syringes, and Geraldine saying, you can only come through the back door tomorrow when everyone else has left. Leave me off your Christmas list, please. It's really interesting here, because when we talk about people not being vaccinated, immediately our mind goes to the anti-vaxxer, someone for whom it's a political statement or a statement of freedom. But you've been dealing with a lot of people who don't want to be vaccinated, and you can't necessarily convince to be vaccinated, and it's not just because they're an anti-vaxxer. What are some of the things that they're telling you?
Yeah, okay, and I'll say that there are people in my family and close circle who have not been vaccinated, and when you sit with them and try and unpick and understand, some of the realisations that you have are actually quite sobering. So for one person in particular, they've had a very traumatic series of experiences in standard healthcare systems, and they've completely lost trust. There are others who work in businesses that were really completely destroyed through lockdowns, and for them the decision to vaccinate or not almost becomes a symbol of the last thing, the final frontier of something that I can choose to do on my own behalf. But I'll also sort of put this in the frame of, if I was having this conversation with family in Zimbabwe, my mum's in Zimbabwe, she'll be there for Christmas. They're dealing with countries who, Zimbabwe's still at 18%. I'd be eating Christmas pudding by myself, right, if I made that sort of mandate. But I think it's really important to realise that at this point in a country like Australia that has really high vaccination levels, it's a really, it's an important opportunity to try and understand the sort of person, because it's a particular type of person who would still, in the face of all of these mandates, remain unvaccinated, and that's part of
they're not unaware of the risks.
No, exactly.
And you've made them aware of it, but you said you cannot convince them.
Yeah, you cannot convince them, and there are a multitude of reasons why people are still at this point, and it's not as simple as, because there is often a tendency, even in medical circles, to just sort of claim that people are just idiots. Oh, why wouldn't you? You know, you need to just go out there and get it done. And in terms of what I would do in my own household, at no point would I ever sort of condone or say, oh, don't worry about it, I'm going to issue a vaccine certificate, because I can issue them, and a vaccine exemption certificate. But I also leave a space that reminds me that at one point we were all unvaccinated. There are still countries in the world where people remain unvaccinated for months, if not years, and to think broadly about what our responsibility is as global citizens to respond to that. And the Christmas dinner thing becomes very kind of secondary, because we have things like rapid antigen. We have ways and means to temper that risk and to decide on our own terms in our own households what level of risk are we prepared to bear. But the harder conversation sits at the global level and the international space. As a country that has really fantastic vaccine producing capability, what are we going to do to change the conversation at Christmas dinner tables around the world, not just
Did you
me.
see that the New, there's some very interesting and sort of confusing material. The New York Times has reported South Africa has requested, it's got 16 million stored vaccines that is worried about running out. And it's actually asked the supplying countries, the US is way ahead of everyone, not to give them any more.
Because it'll pass its use by date.
Indeed.
Right.
And so they know they're losing the battle with the persuasion, and I think Zimbabwe, several southern African countries were in this. It was really a shock to read this, so that it's a little more complicated than sort of the greedy North not supplying the South, because they themselves know they're not winning the persuasion battle, which is, you know, a whole complex set of things. And I just found that a very interesting new development.
Yeah, and Richie, it's changing the way, I mean, even this conversation, a couple of years ago, we're not having this type of conversation, but it just goes to show how COVID has changed so much of the way we interact with each other. Risk, being aware of risk, redefining what freedom is, how much control we have over our own bodies, and the intense politicisation of these things as well.
That's right, yeah. As because I was saying, I don't think at this stage, if those who are unvaccinated, oftentimes they'll feel, you know, like they've taken a risk mitigation approach that they're comfortable with. So how do you have that conversation around how it impacts you and your family and everyone else if you're going to be interacting together? And also, like, you can't help but think transmission is just going to increase dramatically in Australia as we do open up, like the rest of the world has already done. So how do we mitigate this risk collectively? I think there's a role for all of us to play in continuing having these conversations, because it's not that simple. It's not that you've just taken a political stand. You've come to that conclusion, and it's worth having that conversation, and that's something that's only dawned on me recently.
Yeah. Well, you're watching The Drum, and with me on the panel are infectious diseases specialist Dr. Kudzai Kanhutu, host of Saturday Extra on ABCRN, Geraldine Doog, on the south coast of New South Wales, director of the Climate and Energy Program at the Australia Institute, Richie Merzier, and in Canberra, head of policy at the ACT Council of Social Services, Craig Wallace. Labor has